Hello and welcome to Rumpled, Trenchcoat, a Colombo podcast for all your Colombo needs. I'm Rich Nocella and I'm here with my sister,
Adrian Nocella.
And if you're listening to this, congratulations on being related to us. And here's our first ever episode of Colombo, where we're not just going to review it, but with this podcast, we like to not only talk about the episode, but say a little bit about what it means to us as well, because Colombo was a huge part of both of our lives growing up. Even with the significant age difference between us, I watched a few of the seasons live, and you watched them mostly on rerun,
Right.
but still in all, a very big part of our household. So the first episode we're going to talk about is the first episode of the first season, Murder by the Book, in 1971, starring, of course, Peter Falk as Colombo, but Jack Cassidy as Ken Franklin, Martin Milner as his writing partner and murder victim, Jim Ferris, Rosemary Forsythe as Joanne Ferris, and Barbara Colby as a sentient set of novelty teeth.
Oh, no.
Okay.
That's very accurate.
Was that too mean? I don't know.
It's perfect.
Okay.
It's accurate.
She's also our first blackmail murder victim
Yes.
of Colombo. Let's just briefly talk about the motive. Basically, Jack Cassidy as Ken Franklin is part of a very successful writing team of Ken Franklin and Jim Ferris. They write a series of murder mysteries starring a Miss Marple ripoff called Mrs. Melville. And they have 15 books in the series, extremely popular. What we find out is that Jim Ferris is really the one actually writing the books, and Ken Franklin is the face of the books. He does all the book tours and promotion, and Jim Ferris does not want to write these books anymore. So one of the motives is that Ken Franklin is afraid that everyone will know that he's a fraud. But he actually has a second motive, and that is that they have insured each other for a lot of money, and Ken Franklin, even though he made millions with the books, spent a lot more than the millions he had and is in debt.
Yes.
So that's the motive behind that. The plot, and we're at this point, the show is just simply starting. We're listening to the sounds of a typewriter, and we're 18 minutes BC, or before Colombo makes his appearance. Ken wants to establish an alibi and make it look like Jim is killed in their office, and he accomplishes this by taking Jim to his cabin in San Diego, having Jim call his wife from that cabin, and then he kills Jim in the cabin. So the wife thinks that he was killed in the office.
Right. So it sounds as if Jim is just saying, sorry, honey, I'm working late, phone call from his office. But in fact, he's in the cabin with Ken.
That's correct. And Ken shoots him in the cabin. The wife naturally thinks that he's been killed in the office.
Right.
And he set this up a little bit by taking Jim out of the office, making some excuse to go back to get a cigarette lighter, and he trashes the office. And as is often the case in Colombo episodes, it's supposed to look like the mafia killed him and was searching through the place. This we find out later on. It wasn't at least supposed to look like a struggle. It was supposed to look like they were violently searching through the place. But
yeah, it was. It's a little bit of a convoluted murder plot.
Yeah.
Because if I just am following so far, basically the entire setup, like you said, was that Ken Franklin stops by their shared office, and they sort of make mention about how he's trying to patch things up with him because, as you said, Jim Ferris has recently told him, look, we've been at this for 10 years. We're 15 books in. I'd like to go do something else with my career at this point.
Right.
So Ken Franklin refers to it as a divorce, and he proposes. Right. He's sort of, he is the publicist. He's very charming.
Yes.
And, they do have a history of a friendship. So he sort of proposes it as a way. It's almost like, come on, for old time's sake, just join me up at the cabin for the weekend. Yeah. And he convinces the very straight-laced Jim Ferris, who's had dinner plans with his wife later on, to cancel those plans, to accompany him to the cabin.
Right.
And while they're in the parking lot, and Jim Ferris is a little uneasy about it, but you could tell he's like, oh, this is, it is a friend of mine. It hurt his feelings. Let's try to smooth this And on a high note.
Yeah, it's kind of the right thing to do. And they obviously had a huge fight because it was really very awkward between both of them when he does show up at the office. So this wasn't, he did not take the separation well.
He did not take the separation well. And what Ken Franklin tells Jim Ferris, they're in their car, they're about to go off to his remote cabin, is he says, oh, I forgot my lighter in the office. Let me run back upstairs. And then the audience is let in on a little secret, which is that he's not there for his lighter. He's there to trash their shared office and to plant some evidence and to make it look as if there was a struggle and also an ensuing search for confidential information from mobsters.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And as is often the case, again, why would anybody, a mafia hitman or even just an intruder, put his one hand down at the side of the desk and slide it across so everything on the desk goes flying? That's only going to make searching for things a lot harder.
And it's just messy. It just makes a mess.
It's books. It's not.
Yeah, they're just books.
So clearly that was kind of personal. That was Ken upset that this empire that they built is now being torn down. Yes. And then he proceeds to just take papers and throw them up in the air, which is not how anybody would search for anything.
Blank pieces of paper. It was as if he took a stack of typewriter paper that was neatly stacked to be placed into a typewriter and then just, if we're to believe his setup, it's that somebody would look through each individual piece of paper to find evidence. I'm not sure.
I don't think
and fling it about.
But they give us that nice little moment, and I don't know if that's what you wanted to talk about with the cigarette lighter, so why don't you go ahead?
What happens is, though, when Ken Franklin first enters into the room, he puts down his gold lighter, and he begins staging the scene. And then the camera zooms in on the gold lighter at the end of this sort of frenzied trashing of the apartment. And it was a good little camera trick because it led the audience to believe that, oh, he's going to forget that lighter. That's how he's going to get caught. And then, of course, not. He's a very clever villain. He picks up that lighter, lights a cigarette because he is cool as a cucumber, and then proceeds to leave.
Yeah, knowing that he's set the scene so that he's about to now drive for several hours with a man he intends to murder, who he's known for 10 years, was friends with his wife. This is really a particularly horrible guy.
This is a rough one. So they're in their car, and they're headed off. And Ken Franklin mentioned that he bought the cabin 6 months ago. So their relationship must have been strained because he had also mentioned that Jim has never been there to visit.
Right.
So he's had this cabin for 6 months. Their relationship was probably winding down, and they head out to what seems to be a very remote area, but from their conversation, it's really just San Diego.
Right.
So, it's where they're headed.
That's right, a lakefront cabin in San Diego, which, I don't know, maybe back then it was a little more remote. I don't know, but certainly exclusive, if not remote. So Ken has to stop off at a little general store for some supplies before he and Jim go the rest of the way to the cabin. And that's when we meet Lily, the owner of the general store, and he presents her with the book Prescription Murder.
Right.
Which interestingly was not on Jim's desk at the beginning with all the other books.
Oh, okay.
Because I searched for that sucker and it was
you?
Not there. Yes. And I also saw that they had 2 different copies of Mrs. Melville in London on there too. So they were clever, and they didn't expect obviously anybody to actually stop and look at that stuff. But it was kind of funny. It's very clear from that little interaction that Lily has a big crush on Ken because he is so charming and handsome and everything.
Yes.
And he gets the supplies, and while she's getting the supplies, because in the old-fashioned general stores, you give them a list and they get the supplies. You don't really go around shopping. He sneaks into the back and calls Jim's wife, Joanna. Yeah. And that is to cover up the fact that later on Jim is going to call from the cabin. So he's going to make it look like he himself, Ken, is calling Joanna from his cabin, but he's really calling from the general store. And the phone call itself almost doesn't make sense. It was clearly just to establish an alibi for him, because he basically called Joanna and said, hey, you know that huge fight we all had? Well, we've patched it up and everything's fine, and I'm going to my cabin for a little bit. by the way, don't tell Jim about this.
Yeah,
Again,
it was awkward. It was a weird thing to do. He did make it sound like I didn't want you to worry, and he did say that he saw him earlier that day in their office,
right.
And now he's at his cabin.
That's right.
Basically, I left Jim there, definitely not murdered
Right.
by me, and now I'm in my cabin, and I just want to let you know everything's okay. By the way, don't ever suspect me because we're all good.
Yes, we're all fine now, and now I'm down to just one motive for murder.
Yeah.
And I left him alive and well, and he's not at all next to me in the car.
Right.
So they go back to the cabin, and now Jim is starting to get a little anxious because he doesn't lie to his wife. He's a straightforward guy. And now here he is several hours away without telling his wife where he went. So Ken says, go ahead, call her. Just tell her you're going to be working at the office late. Instead of saying, hey, by the way, Ken stopped by and invited me to the cabin, and I thought it would be a good way to patch things up, he's now going forward with this lie.
Right.
And, of course, in the middle of the phone call, Ken shoots him so that Joanna hears her husband being shot after he said, I'm working late at the office. So that really sets up Ken's alibi. He has established that he's at the cabin. He made Joanna think that Jim was still at the office and shot him in the office. So she has every reason to believe that Jim was murdered in the office while Ken was miles and miles away. And so she immediately calls the cabin, and Ken answers the phone saying, oh, don't worry about it, I'm coming right up. This is where it starts to get really, really Colombo-y. Yes. Because first of all, Ken, the last thing that he made Jim do was lie to his wife. So that was pretty terrible. As a guy who doesn't lie to his wife. I didn't even
think of that. Basically, all we really know about the Jim character is that he's brilliant and he's incredibly creative. And he was actually, according to his wife, pretty happy taking a back seat to the publicity part of it. And the only other thing we know about him is this guy loves his wife. He does not shut up about her. I'd say 95% of his lines are like, oh, my wife. Yes. So this guy loves his wife. So you're right. That was really lousy that the very last thing he did, the last sentence he uttered was a lie to his wife.
To his wife that he's never lied to before.
Right.
So that was pretty lousy. And after talking to Joanna's wife, knowing how terrified she is, Ken literally toasts the dead body of Jim. He lifts a glass to him kind of sarcastically. So, he's
pretty despicable.
Yeah, this is pretty clear that we're supposed to definitely hate this guy. And we do.
Right.
But it gets even worse. Now, we should probably mention at this point, this was directed by Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. And this is just a few short years before Jaws.
Right.
So that to kind of put it in where he is with his directorial career.
Yes. And so a very clear Steven Spielberg touch is when Ken is, we know as an audience, he's about to get Jim's body and put it in the trunk of his car. We see a huge close-up of a "Have a nice day" bumper sticker on the back of his Mercedes-Benz.
Yes.
Now, you're not going to have a bumper sticker on the back of a brand new Mercedes-Benz, and you could even see that it wasn't even pressed down tightly so that it could be easily removed again from the prop department. It was just supposed to be a, hey, this is a very 70s modern thing that was going on at the time. And also the irony that we would see "Have a nice day" as he's about to put his partner's dead body in the trunk of his car and then drive several hours to his widow.
Right.
With his widow's dead body in the trunk of his car.
Yeah, he actually, when he was getting off the phone with Joanna, he tells her not to worry. I'm sure everything will be fine. It's probably a prank.
Yeah.
And don't forget, not only did he know Jim for 10 years, he's known Joanna for 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's that the way that she made it sound about Ken is that they were sort of like a little writing family.
Right. We kind of crash cut to the office, and this is very much a Steven Spielbergian type scene. You have her in the middle, a detective on either side of her, rapid firing, asking her questions.
Yes.
She's doubting herself because they're asking, well, you sure it was his voice?
Because of course they're in this trashed office and there's no body. There's
Right.
no evidence of blood because this isn't really the scene of the crime.
That's right.
Jim
That's
was
right.
not murdered here.
This was just purely staged. So they're not seeing
Yes.
any evidence that this guy is dead. What they're
Yes.
seeing is about 82 redwood trees worth of paper on the floor.
Yes.
Because as ridiculous as him throwing the paper on the floor was, it's even more ridiculous how much they then put on the floor by the time
Right.
we as an audience get to see it again.
Right.
And, they're carrying these unusual props that I guess they had as writers, maybe from, parts of her story or something like
Right.
that. And this part is very cinematic. It's very, the camera's moving around. There's
I was
it's a
gonna
lot.
say it's like I remember it being like it's a shaky cam, which we're kind of
Yeah.
used to now, but
Right.
at the time that had to have been, I can't really think of an earlier, maybe Cassavetes and all those guys kind of did it, but it had that very sort
Yeah.
of gritty sort of, I know this is LA, but like definitely a New York detective
Yeah.
modern film noir scene. That's what this really is.
It definitely had the sense that all of a sudden this was going to be a police procedural. That now here's the
Absolutely.
The guy taking a picture of what would have been a body, but there is no body, so he's just
Right.
taking a picture of stuff. Basically,
Yeah.
leans into the camera and takes a picture of us, the audience. Just to kind of get a sense of how disorienting and confusing all this is, and to the point where she even says, "I'm feeling stupid. I just need to get out of here and get a drink of water or something."
Yeah, she's really overwhelmed. She heard her husband get shot.
Yes.
And then she rushes over there, calls the police, and now
And
there's
there's
no
nobody.
evidence.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Yeah.
So she really is sort of doubting herself and just feeling very, very overwhelmed, as anybody would.
Yes, and you can see it's obviously many hours later because it's dark. So this has been going on for a long time because unlike in other episodes, she does call the police right away.
Yes.
So she does the right thing, calls the cops right away. And so she goes into the hallway where it's quiet. And now we have our very first appearance of Colombo, not counting the pilots. We have our first appearance of Colombo.
Police Department, Lieutenant Colombo. Would you mind if I came in?
And he's talking to her about how the water fountains don't work.
Right.
And so then he basically invites her back to her place because it's just so overwhelming here for her, and she can answer questions later. And so now they're back at her place where he proceeds to make her an omelet.
Yes, and he makes her an omelet. What I find funny about him, this must just be the character's technique to get people to open up to him or to sort of manipulate the situation in his favor, and not in a malicious way towards her, obviously, but much like how he acts sort of incompetent to put villains at ease or murderers at ease with him. He also is to make them stay. He also with her is very self-depreciating. He's sort of very he's like, I can't cook anything, but I can make an omelet. And he's just really trying to calm her down, and it works. She loosens up. And she's able to really have a conversation and really is able to open up with Colombo about her husband and what went on for that evening.
Yes, and that is true because at first she's so tightly wound because of everything she's been through. And by the time he bumbles halfway through an omelet, she is now helping him make an omelet and she's helping him make coffee. And that is enough of a distraction for her to be honest with him about the fact that, and that's how we really find out that Ken does not do any of the writing, and he hasn't for years. So the implication is maybe the first couple of books he really contributed, and that for years after that, he just would basically show up and go on interviews. And again, like you said, Jim really didn't like that stuff. So it was a good enough partnership. They were both getting what they wanted out of it.
Absolutely.
But now Jim just wanted to move on. And but that's where we find out because yes, she opens up. She says, "Look, this is what's been going on. This is, he hasn't written a long time." And that's when Columbo says, "Ooh, that's got to be hard for his ego."
Right.
And this is without even meeting the man, but he already knew that was going to be hard on somebody that they've been writing books as a team for years. And if the other guy stops and the books stop, then people are going to know that Ken was not the talented one or talented at all.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And so now Ken shows up at the house with her husband's dead body in the trunk of his car.
In the trunk of his car. Yeah. And he comes in and he embraces her.
Yep.
He walks in and tries to console her and comfort her.
And ask for a drink.
And ask for a drink while you're at it. Make me a drink.
And now here we are about 23, 24 episodes in, and now the killer has met Colombo.
And he meets Colombo, and what's I think notable about this exchange is immediately Ken Franklin is very assertive and aggressive towards Colombo. There's really no provocation there.
No.
Colombo really just is saying basically hi, and before he can get much out, Ken Franklin is firing sort of interrogation-like questions to Colombo about basically what have you done? Where is he? What's going on? What are you, an idiot? Mrs. Melville would have this figured out. You know, he comes right out of the gate, sort of very dismissive, condescending, right towards Colombo. From the moment they meet, really.
Yes, and it's interesting because it's not like he's annoyed with Colombo. There have been other killers who are annoyed quickly.
Right.
But this is a case where it's almost like he sized Colombo up and incorrectly thinks he could bully him. Yes. And so he's trying to bully him into this theory of it being the mafia, his cover story. That he's like, hey, look, and anytime you invoke a fictional detective to a real detective, that's kind of shorthand for this guy's a jerk, because of course a fictional detective is going to do better, which is funny because Colombo is a fictional detective. But, in the context of the world, he's a real detective. So Colombo, of course, just absorbs it all. So now Colombo is sizing him up, saying, yeah, first of all, I was probably right about his ego. And second of all, I already know how I'm going to get this guy off guard by just allowing myself to learn from him, as he often does with killers.
Well, what's so cool about this scene and this meeting is that because as the audience, not only do we have the advantage of seeing what happened with Ken Franklin and the murder itself, we also have the advantage of seeing that Colombo already knows something about Ken Franklin that Ken Franklin doesn't know he knows, which is that he's a fraud. He doesn't write these novels. And I'm sure he was waiting to see how he presented himself. And he presents himself like a fraud who doesn't write these novels. And Colombo knows it. And he really puts on the publicist hat more than anything else. And that I think that's what publicists do. They write the narrative. And I think that's what he's trying to do. I think he's trying to write the narrative. What's so great about this episode, what struck me about this episode in particular, because like you said, when growing up, obviously I didn't watch them chronologically. I just kind of caught them on reruns, and they would play they would play this episode a lot, but they would play some more than others, And what I think is great about this episode is as the pilot, Levinson and Link, who developed Colombo, had such a clear vision for what they wanted this story to be and this world of Colombo to be, that this episode, even though it's the pilot, could have easily been found in season 3, season 5. It was so well laid out. You know how sometimes you watch a show and then you go back, maybe you're like 5 seasons in, and you go back and watch the pilot and it's almost unrecognizable.
Yes.
You know?
Well, I'm sure Seinfeld, Cheers, all these.
Well, I mean, look, Family Matters. You think it's about a family, and then Steve Urkel's like time traveling. Like, it's insane how far off a course this show can go, or how things get developed. And with this, it was very strong from the start. You have all the elements of what makes Colombo Colombo. So if you were to say to somebody who's never seen the show, what is Colombo about? You can show them this episode because it's a true representation of what this show is. You have a very wealthy, unlikable villain. Who's aggressive and condescending. You have Colombo, who, unlike the movie that preceded this, is very bumbling, very tripping over himself in an attempt, as we know as the audience, to disarm the villain. We have the same wealthy murderer doing his best to run the investigation. They insert themselves into the investigation because they have to compensate for Colombo's incompetence. It really has everything. And I think that's a testimony to the world that Levinson and Link created.
Yes, and in fact, what Colombo does, and he does in this episode and in many episodes, it's almost like if you want somebody else to talk, stop talking.
Yes.
And they will naturally want to fill in that silence. So with Colombo, he's like, gee, I have no idea how this could have blah, blah, blah. And so the killer will then say, well, Colombo, don't you understand that clearly the killer was blah, 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 blah. And it would either be something that couldn't possibly be true, so Colombo knows that he's lying about it, or it's actually what the killer himself did, and for some reason he felt comfortable sharing that. So
it's just this arrogance that bites them in the end every time, and it really is present here as well. So
yeah.
this is just a great representation, I think, of the entire world of Colombo and what Colombo is. So the next scene is Ken, again, an attempt to just help out this bumbling, incompetent lieutenant.
Oh, that's right.
Right. He brings him to the office to show Colombo what everybody missed in the crime scene.
Yes.
So now you have, with that scene, we saw maybe it seemed like 7 to 10 police officers plus the detectives. I mean, it was crawling with police officers.
Yeah.
And Ken Franklin's like, look, you idiot, come follow me. Let me show you what you've missed, because he wanted to make sure that this whole mobster hit out on Jim Ferris would be the trail that the police officers start taking to find him.
That's right. This is him basically throwing breadcrumbs in a completely different direction for people to follow.
Right.
Because if you're looking for the mafia, you'll never solve anything. It's just going to be almost impossible to solve. And
that's his reasoning, yes.
Yeah, the idea is, gee, you had 800 policemen scour this entire building, but here's a list that they clearly all missed. And by the way, they kind of did, because he didn't. It was already planted much earlier in the day. It's not like he just planted it on the spot.
So the list that we're referring to is there's a list of names of famous, or I guess I should say notorious mobsters in the California West Coast, LA, Miami area. And he says to Colombo, look, this list. And Colombo's sort of like, oh, what does this mean? And he has to be like, you idiot. Mrs. Melville would have put this together right quick. That's the refrain we keep on hearing over and over again. Mrs. Melville would have. Mrs. Melville would have. And so, of course, what he says to him is, this is a list of notorious mobsters. Jim was researching this topic or this area for his next novel, and I guess he rattled some feathers, and they probably put a hit on him. You might want to check out these guys.
Right. But even then, Colombo can't help himself that he says, well, that's funny, because here's this list of mobsters, but why is it folded like it would be tucked in somebody's pocket?
Right.
Because, of course, that's where the killer had tucked it.
It was tucked in his pocket.
It was folded and tucked in his pocket.
That's why.
But again, that's how Colombo got the killer to come up with an explanation, which is, he always folds papers over to use as bookmarks. But it also is letting the killer know just a little bit, because that is when he said, now you're starting to think like Mrs. Melville. So he showed even the slightest bit of intelligence.
Yes.
And therefore he said, and that's when he gives Colombo, and I counted this, he gives him 10 books. Colombo eventually returns 14, but
okay.
And 2 of the books that he gives Colombo are duplicates. They are that Mrs. Marple in London. So
okay, so just like 2 different editions.
Big stack of books, yeah.
Okay. Right. And then so the next scene, we see Ken return home. It's real late at night at this point, and he walks in his front door with a stack of mail and calls the police department, asks for Lieutenant Colombo by name to report Jim his body dumped on his front lawn.
Yes.
That's what he does. So he's like, look, I've found Jim. He's on my front lawn. He's dead.
Right, because that was the whole idea. That's the only reason why he took the body with him, is to drop him off on his front lawn, supposedly as a message from the mafia. Hey, Jim got too close to us with all these questions. You'd better not write this book yourself either.
Yeah, stop investigating us. Stick with Mrs. Melville, basically.
That's
the idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Colombo, of course, comes to the house, and you have the scene, again, a little bit more cinematic. You have people in their bathrobes and curlers kind of running up to the, running in frame to look at the dead body on the front lawn. So eventually Colombo and Ken go into Ken's house.
Yes.
And that's when Colombo is just kind of, taking everything in. Partner of 10 years, dead bodies on the front lawn, and Colombo's asking him about pictures on the wall.
About paintings, about, this is a nice joint you got.
Basically, it's like, hey, this is a nice place you got here. Oh, and you've got that place in San Diego, too. Boy, that must be really expensive. And, these pictures are originals. That must be expensive. And interesting, this is one of the few times that Colombo actually accepts a drink on duty. He asks him if he's going to drink. And he says, a little bourbon. And his reaction was strange. I don't know what to make of it. He said, bourbon? I don't know if that's like like an insult or something, or just
I don't know
something
if
to
he was
say?
surprised that he took it. I took it as Ken was surprised that he accepted a drink. That's what I
Okay,
took it as. Yeah, I don't know what the intent was.
all right. Yeah, or I don't know if you're just going to judge him whatever he chose, just
Right.
because that's just
Because
him
he
being
does. He
arrogant.
judges him throughout this entire episode.
Yes.
He's
Yeah.
constantly putting him down for being unable to afford a cabin,
Right.
not being a good swimmer, not being athletic. Like the entire episode, he's just giving him little jabs.
He
So,
really is. He's
yeah.
just in the business the whole time. But that's where they really kind of hash out the whole, hey, clearly this is the mafia. You should really call everyone on that list. But by the way, when you call everyone on that list, they, of course, are going to deny that Jim ever spoke to them.
And
Knowing
don't
that
forget, the irony is that Ken Franklin wasn't working on this book. So this is
that's
all for nothing.
well,
This is what Ken's making it
dropping the
sound.
body
Yeah.
off on his lawn,
On
right?
his lawn was all for naught.
Right, because it's like, oh, they're warning me from writing this book, but I don't intend to write this book. So it's interesting that they did not in this episode choose to do something Columbo's done in other episodes, which is to say, oh, you know what, your life is in danger if the mob is after you.
Yeah.
Think you're going to do
Aren't
that.
you concerned? Yeah.
We better tap your phone and play somebody.
Right.
So they didn't choose to do that this time, but I think Columbo already had a pretty good idea. It wasn't necessary. But on the way out, Columbo notices the opened mail.
Yes.
And he says, so, just one more little detail here. Could you tell me again what happened when you got home and saw his body on the lawn? He said, well, I came in and called the police. And Columbo said, well, if it were me, if I saw my partner of 10 years dead on the front lawn, I don't think I ever would have thought to open the mail.
Yeah. I know this guy's like checking his publisher's clearinghouse and he's
Right.
got his dead friend on the front lawn. It
Scratch
just
off
really
the
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't really, really mesh well. It doesn't really make too much sense, which is why, of course, Columbo noticed it and asked him about it.
Yes. And again, one now after Ken has gotten in so many digs, Columbo was starting to get in a couple of his own because he said, I just needed something to distract myself while I waited for the police. Right. And Columbo said, yeah, well, bills are distracting.
That was so great. Yes, he did say that. Yes, he did. And, I have to say, Columbo's investigation style is really insidious.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because he just does these little teeny tiny passive aggressive drops. These little statements that just drop off that if you were completely innocent wouldn't bother you.
That's right.
But if you're guilty, you're gonna be up all night thinking that one over.
Yeah, because when he loaned him the books directly from the office, that little line that Columbo dropped was, if it were me, instead of getting in the car and driving several hours, I would have just taken a flight.
Yes. And you know what's funny? They make a big deal about the flight versus the drive. You're absolutely right. Because Columbo, it's actually I think one of the first things he says to him that's just the slightest bit of, oh, I'm suspecting you.
Yes.
And I looked it up, and San Diego from LA is approximately 2 hours. So I don't know with like traffic or anything like that. Let's say it even takes you 4 hours to drive back.
Right.
Maybe I'm just putting a 2020 spin on what an airport experience is like now versus 1971.
Oh, well, yes.
But because now you got to get there like 6 hours early and you're hanging out and a whole thing. Maybe there was a time in this country where you could just kind of walk to an airport and hop on a plane.
Well, I think we know that's true just from the pilot.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Prescription Murder.
That's
and
true.
Prescription Murder basically said, hey, pack your bags, hon. We're going to Acapulco.
We're going.
Like,
yes, that's true.
So
but
we
he doesn't
know
make a
that's
big
true.
deal of it. But, it's not like his cabin was in, like, Portland, Oregon.
No.
Right? It's a couple of hours away. So that bothered me.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't know if they were going with actual distance, only because Ken made a point of saying I was driving for several hours in my car.
Yeah.
And nobody calls two several. So I think it's supposed to be 3 hours.
4 hours,
or 4 hours.
Just the thought of a plane experience only being 3 or 4 hours is just foreign to me. So that's why I was like, what?
Absolutely. Look, there was basically no security. You really could show up, buy a ticket, get on, fly on over there. He said, it's a big airport. Flights leave every half hour, so
it's like taking a train.
Right.
Maybe it's just like taking a train to the city. It's just you just catch one. Okay.
That's the next one. So I think just from the way he says it, And the fact that Ken is taken aback a little bit, like he realizes this might have been his first mistake, but he had to drive because he had to have the dead body in the car. He couldn't leave that at the airport.
You can't lug a body into
No.
a crate and then fly with it.
Right.
He had to drive. You're right.
Even then, he couldn't have used him as carry-on. So,
no.
But I think that's if we accept that we have to accept that probably he could or an innocent person could have just hopped on a plane and maybe got there in 45 minutes instead of 3 or 4 hours.
Okay. All right. I'm on board. I'm back on board.
Right.
Convince me. Oh, there's a hilarious scene where now Colombo meets with the insurance agent that has the policy on the Franklin and Ferris writing team.
Yes. Yeah, you want to go ahead and tell us about that?
Yeah, so they meet. They kind of cut to the next scene where it's this giant hot dog stand that's shaped like an actual giant hot dog. It was just so cool.
Yep, Tail the pup.
Is that what it was? Tail the pup.
Yep.
And so he's meeting with an insurance broker, and who knows Colombo, obviously. I'm guessing just from the court system or something along those lines. And he's very eager to discuss with Colombo because he thinks that Colombo's finally going to get an insurance policy.
Right.
But Colombo instead says, no, listen, I have some questions for you. Let me buy your lunch, which was a hot dog.
A hot dog.
A single hot dog. Which, if you notice,
cut in half.
They split a hot dog in half, I guess, to fit on a sandwich roll. I don't know what goes on in the West Coast, but listen, that's not what we do here. But the best part is that Colombo asks for a receipt for the hot dog.
He asks for a receipt for the hot dog just to make sure that the lawyer guy or the insurance guy knows this is official business.
This is official business. And so the insurance broker says, okay, what can I do for you? And Colombo asks him information about this writing team, if they had an insurance policy on each other.
Right.
And the insurance broker replies, oh, well, listen, that's real confidential information. I can't quite give that out. And once again, Colombo, who you don't want to mistake his disheveled appearance as anything other than him being as serious as he is, because he does say, listen, I could go ahead and get a court order.
Yeah.
But I don't to get this information, but I don't really think we need to go that route.
Well, that's because that's what he does. It was kind of another golly gee willikers, if it would make it easier for you.
That's what he
like
said.
How it would ever make it easier for you.
Yeah, like it's easier to get the court involved with your personal business. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, if it would be easier for you, I could get a warrant.
But then he does. That's when he finds out that they have an insurance policy on each other. So that's now motive number 2. So Colombo now already has had the benefit of knowing that Ken didn't write any of these stories. So motive number 1, ego, right? With this guy is ego. Motive number 2, money. That's really the bigger motive, right? So he now knows that Ken will collect, not on the royalties of the books, that all's going to go to Joanna Ferris, but he will collect on the insurance policy on his writing partner.
That's right. And Colombo had thought that even before he double-checked, that's what he was talking about when he asked about the royalty.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yes, exactly.
So now after this, we've got the hot dog stand scene. We assume, and it's later confirmed, that yes, they did insure each other. Now we abandon all of that to go to the theater.
Yes.
And so Ken is with an attractive woman who is irrelevant. He's there with yet another attractive woman.
Just a beautiful woman who's probably 65 years younger than him.
Yeah.
She is spectacularly beautiful. And even at the theater, he is still such an egomaniac that she's like, hey, she's perfectly pleasant. It's not like she's a jerk. She's like, hey, I enjoyed this play. This was great. He's like, you did? I figured it out right from the start. What are you? You're just too beautiful and young to understand anything, And she's like, I just wanted to have a nice night. Like, what's going on?
She's like, all I said was I liked the play.
Yeah, and she's like, thanks.
I didn't see it coming. I didn't guess it. And it's like, I knew it right away.
Right. So he's just condescending to everybody, including her.
So as they're walking out, that's when we see Lily
Lysenko,
dressed to the nines.
Pretty good, I gotta be honest.
Yeah.
She looks pretty good for a little country store owner, right? Shop owner. She looks pretty good.
Yeah, no, she looked like she belonged there.
Yes.
Except for her behavior, and that's where where as he was walking past. Now she had a perfect opportunity as he was walking past to say, "Oh, hello," and instead it like took her way too long. And I think it's really just because they wanted her to literally raise her hand, flail it around, and shout, "Mr. Franklin, Mr. Franklin."
Yeah, they had her be as shrill and loud and as obnoxious as it was, like blowing a whistle, except it was her voice and she was calling his name.
Yes.
Mr. Franklin! You! Over here! But it was like blowing a full-on whistle. Yes. Mr. Franklin! And he's just like, oh. And it's so loud and jarring that his date said, who is that? Because in her defense, it was that loud. And his reply is, somebody that should not be here. Let me go take care of this.
Is, again, a wonderful little window into his character. He could have just said, oh, that's somebody I know from the lake. Oh, that's a fan who won't leave me alone. Right. To say somebody who shouldn't be here. Yeah. Really just, again, such a classist state. Like, she has no business being in a theater.
And what's interesting, when he makes his way over to her, he's very gracious, and because he is a charmer, right? He is a publicist. He's very charming. And she goes to kiss him hello, and he leans back and offers his hand to shake her hand.
Yes.
I mean, how dare you?
Yes.
How rude.
And this again, now I know I teased her a little earlier on, and the truth is, I really only think in the 70s would they have given an actress like this the part, because she's an excellent actress, but she is legitimately homely. Yeah. And now I think they would have hired a typically beautiful actress and like gave her glasses, gave her a funny
like a
haircut,
fake nose, right.
Just something. We're about to come up to a couple of big scenes with her, but she was a very good actress. And phenomenal. In this moment, she really, because she's conveying it all. She basically is, we're about to find out that she witnessed something. Yes. And she wants Ken to get rid of his date so that they could go on a date where she could talk about it. But the way she relays it, you could tell she's very nervous. Like she can't quite believe she's doing it, but she wants to do it. And as he continues to try and dismiss her, at one point she literally grabs his pocket with her hand and twists it to say, "Don't go away. I'm talking to you, and this is
not dismiss me. Do not dismiss me. Yeah. Turn around. You're going to want to hear what I have. You're going to hear what this little country mouse has to say." Right? I mean, that's what she's doing.
That's really it. It's like once she finally got up the nerve to actually do it, she's like, now you're going to listen to me. This is
right.
I'm not going to be yet another person that you say pleasant things to and walk away from. Right. This is now a conversation we're going to have. And when she says basically, she couches it in the phrase of, I have a story I'm working on. It involves a witness. And she really hits that word hard. Yeah. And he's like, oh, all right, I'll get rid of my date. Hold on.
Yeah, exactly.
So now they're at this fancy restaurant.
I have I have a lot to say about this fancy restaurant.
I figured.
This is what it is. Here's the scene. Okay, I'm just gonna sum it up, and you can flesh it out if you would like to.
Sure.
But basically, her teeth blackmails his dimples. It's just extreme close-ups of both them, which is a Spielberg jam for sure. That he likes those angles. But that's what's going on, right? And it's this very intimate dinner, and she's absolutely flirting with him while she's blackmailing him, and he's flirting back while acknowledging he's getting blackmailed. So she's no dummy. I think she just enjoys his attention.
Yes.
I think we learn that she's a widow and that she is interested in him romantically, but also she's interested in being paid for her silence because she did witness that Jim Ferris accompanied him, Ken, to his cabin.
Yes, she saw Jim sitting in the passenger seat of his car. Right. So she's the only one who knows that Jim was not in his office being murdered.
Yes.
And that would basically be the end of Ken. That would just blow everything out the water.
She's got him. She has him. I do want to take a minute to discuss what they're eating, because would you like to talk about it? Because I can't. It's so distracting to me.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. So the waiter is bringing over on a huge ice bucket about 4 strawberries.
It is a full-on crystal punch bowl filled with ice and maybe 4 strawberries.
Yeah. And in front of them is a tiny little cocktail glass and a little bowl of sugar.
Yeah.
And so you're supposed to take the strawberry, dip it in the wine or aperitif or whatever it is, and then roll it in the sugar and then eat it. And that's what they're doing. And of course, continuity, the strawberry will have 1 bite, 2 bites. It'll be just the stem. It'll be the full strawberry. There's just no continuity whatsoever. So if you want to laugh, watch the strawberries. But that's like the main dessert course. So this place is so fancy that they don't even have an actual dessert.
I can't get past this. Is there something that, again, just a history lesson for me?
Right.
Am I unaware of a great strawberry shortage of 1971 in California? Like, why would this be? And that probably was like an $85 dessert. And I'm trying to think of like what would be the equivalent of today's ridiculous things that we do with dessert that we pay for. Like, have you ever had fancy dessert where it's like a piece of chocolate cake and they put like some stupid ginger foam on top of it,
right?
And you're just like, what? I mean, this looks beautiful, and you're like, get caught up in it for a minute, and you're like, this would be a lot better without this ginger foam or whatever. I was trying to think of whatever the equivalent would be of something as preposterous as getting excited over 4 strawberries on ice.
A bowl of strawberries.
Yeah.
Right. A bowl of ice with strawberries in it. Yeah. Or that piece of cake would have like some kind of chocolate drizzle, all over the plate. It makes a pretty fancy pattern, but you can't even eat that.
I mean, it's still just cheesecake. Like, what's happening? You know what I mean? So I was just like, what? And they have this like big romantic scene, and really they're there to talk business. Yes. She sort of skirts around it. She's still nervous, but I think she's feeling a little bit more comfortable steering that ship. Right. Because she's really steering that conversation and she's really saying, look, I have this great story. And he at some point just cuts her off and says, let's stop talking about the story. What do you know is essentially what he's asking her. And she says, again, I've witnessed everything. And he says, OK, what's that going to cost me?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And she tells him.
Yes.
She has a number in mind. $15,000, which I looked up in today's money, 95 grand. So that's not chump change. That's a lot of money.
I was going to say, I didn't realize that. I'm glad you did that because I was trying to think, gee, would that have been like 40,000? I knew it was a lot, but not a lot for a millionaire.
Yeah.
Like it was still reasonable enough. Hey, let's just pay her off.
Right.
But it was still a lot of money.
That's a lot of money for a millionaire and probably millions of debt.
Yes.
Right. He may be a millionaire on paper, but
yes, exactly.
He's cash poor, right?
Yeah. No, he's basically poor.
Right.
If he was gonna give her that money and let her keep it, he was gonna have to sell one of those paintings on his wall, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's $95,000. That's a lot. That's a lot of money, and that is enough to keep somebody quiet, I think.
Again, because he really doesn't have that kind of money at his discretion. He really doesn't. So it wouldn't be a lot of money for a millionaire, but it would be a lot of money for somebody who's kind of pretending to be a millionaire.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what he does. He pretends to be a lot of things. He pretends to be an author. He pretends to be a millionaire. He pretends to be pleasant. And he's none of those.
He pretends to be interested in her. He's now flirting with her, complimenting her, and they kind of seal the deal with him feeding her a strawberry, which again is very seductive. It's just like, hey, I'm a murderer and you're blackmailing me, but that doesn't mean we can't be a couple,
Right. Yeah. We're going to have a great future together of you witnessing me murdering somebody and blackmailing me for it. Cheers. Yeah.
Never want to be a blackmailer.
No, it's a bad way to go. It never works out.
It really does not work out. Not very well. And it doesn't for her.
The next scene is another example of how sort of like slimy I think the Ken Franklin character is.
It's the interview.
He's having an interview with, I'm just going to call her Lady Marmalade. Like, I don't know what she's dressed like, but she is wearing, if you were to go to Party City and buy a 1970s pimp costume, that's what this reporter is wearing. She's interviewing him We eventually wind up watching her very own Me Too moment
Right.
because he cuts the interview short because he's so distracted because Colombo comes
Colombo,
bumbling on the scene,
Right.
dropping 45 books that he read, because he's a super genius. So he read all of those books overnight. And she's sitting there with her felt maroon hat. I have to talk about this hat because I love it so much. Okay, just indulge me with this conversation.
No, absolutely.
She's wearing
the hat is worth it.
A maroon felt hat with the pom-pom, and if that's not enough accoutrement for your hat, there's also a buckle. So those are all of those things on that hat. Like if your kids ever had like a crazy hat day, you would throw that on their head.
Yes.
And she's just wearing it as like this beautiful, sophisticated 1970s woman, which I'm sure of the time she was.
She's an interviewer of a literature magazine or a trendy magazine. Yeah.
Yes, and she's interviewing him, and he cuts the interview short. But not before he makes sort of an advance. He makes a pass at her. And she's like, okay, that sounds great. Yeah. Or maybe that's maybe how I'm viewing it now. But she's like, okay, that sounds great. Because, he is an important literary figure. And he is incredibly handsome.
Now,
so I get it.
This may be because you're female and I'm male. To be honest, when I saw that scene, I thought that she was genuinely flattered, and that maybe she was, she seemed like she was interested in meeting with him, but I don't know. What I do know is funny is she leaves, he kisses her hand, he closes the door, and then the photographer walks by with all his gear and he said, "Oh, hey, sorry, Frank," or whatever, So the photographer didn't exist to him.
No, he was just into the reporter. Yeah, the reporter. Exactly. Yeah, you're right. There was no one else in that room, except he did get distracted by Colombo because Colombo walks in the middle of that interview.
Yes.
Having the stacks of books that Ken had given him just the night before, I guess.
I don't know. I'm having a hard time with the time frame. I really think it can't have been more than a day or two.
No.
I guess it depends how quickly Lily, because we did cut from the insurance confirmation to Lily at the theater. So if that was 2 or 3 days later, okay, fair enough. But that's really the only segment of time that isn't going by immediately. Mm-hmm. So he comes back with more books than he borrowed. And I know that's just a continuity thing, but I had to laugh at that because it always struck me funny when I saw that he went out with a fairly manageable handful. And he came back with like 2 stacks, one in each hand, dropping them.
It's so funny too, because like you're saying, it's a continuity thing. I noticed a continuity thing too, is that when Colombo was making an omelet for this, going way back, one of the first scenes when Colombo's in, when he's making an omelet for Joanna.
Yes.
And he asks for a bowl because he wanted to grate some cheese in it.
Yes.
And so she's like, "Oh, it's in that cabinet," which, sidebar, there's like 500 cabinets in that kitchen. And really, I don't know what was happening. But he opens, of course, the first one. He finds the bowl and the grater. And if you pay attention, it's filled with cheese already. So they probably cut and recut that scene a few times.
Okay.
But yes, so that's just like another continuity. That's the only continuity thing I picked up.
That's fun. I did miss that. That's a good one. So he's showed up, he's interrupted the interview. Colombo has shown up with the books to return them, to basically confirm with Ken, "Oh yeah, you know what? Every mafia guy I talked to said that he never heard of this Jim Ferris guy." And I don't know, did Colombo really call all these mafia people? Knowing him, he probably did. Because he's so thorough.
He's so thorough. So he probably did. And he probably did read all of those books. And he probably did everything that we would think he would do because he's sort of like a super detective.
Right.
So, yeah, I think he probably did. I think he probably had somebody check it out just in case.
Yeah, because that way it'll be at least one more thing for him to say, yeah, these mafia guys, they don't know anything about this at all. And he notices while he's there that there's 2 bottles of champagne.
Yes, he does.
That he's going out to his cabin again for the weekend. And Ken says, "I'm more than capable of drinking those 2 bottles and a good deal more." But again, Colombo's got his antenna up.
That's right.
I don't think there was anything else about that scene, correct?
No, that scene was really just, I think, to have Colombo do a little dig about the mafia list that he cleared, and also to establish that Colombo now knows that Ken Ferris is headed back up to the cabin. I'm sorry, Ken Franklin is now headed back up to the cabin. I want to say this. I'm confusing Ferris and Franklin. Do you think this was intentional with the writing team of Levinson and Link?
Well, I think it's certainly possible because both names are completely fictional. So I don't know.
Just sort of a nod to their partnership in writing Colombo.
Well, I think that there definitely is an element of that. Yeah, I think so.
I mean, because
I
what we're
think so.
talking about is a partnership between
Right.
two men that have
Right.
the same initials, last names, surnames,
Right.
and they're team writing about a detective
Right.
heroine, right?
That's right.
So that's what Levinson and Link are doing, is
Yep.
that they
It
are
basically
writing
is that.
partners.
So,
It's
yeah,
their story,
yeah,
maybe with a lot less, probably with a lot less resentment.
I would, I would say so, since they went on to make some great movies too. So
Right.
I would say so. Notably, Roller Coaster.
I think it's a
With
car, right? There's also a car movie. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, there might have been. I'm not sure. Roller Coaster, Guilty Conscience, and Murder by Natural Causes.
Oh, okay,
Were
that's so great.
a couple of TV movies. We'll have to talk about those at some point.
Yeah.
And interesting too, Columbo's car kind of makes a cameo.
Oh, does it?
It's in the episode,
Oh, I didn't
but
see.
there's only one time that you actually see him get out of it. It's always just kind of there.
Hmm.
Like when he goes into Joanna's house, he pulls up behind Columbo's car, but they don't
Okay.
make a big deal out of it. In fact, the only scene where any attention is brought to it at all is when Columbo drives very badly and like drives up over a curb or something at
Okay.
the woman's house. And the only reason I thought of it is because that scene's coming up next. So
Sure.
relatively soon. Now, of course, we have the scene where he's going to the cabin to give Lily the money.
Yeah, and it's just like this bizarre, what a bizarre scene. I mean, it's an excellent scene. Again, well acted, incredibly directed. Everything there is really just phenomenal. But
Right.
it's very strange because they're on, it's again like the sort of almost like a, I don't know if cat and mouse is the right way to explain it, but
Yeah.
they're on a date, but she's blackmailing him and he's
for murder.
acquiescing for
Yeah.
murder, and
Yes.
he's paying her.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, let's get this ugly business out of the way, make me dinner. And she looks dynamite in this
Yes.
scene.
Yes.
She looks
No.
really beautiful.
She's really dolled herself up.
Yeah.
And there was a great, again, a nice Spielberg type of scene where the camera is on her and the champagne glass. The camera follows the champagne glass to clink with his champagne glass, and the camera continues to follow the champagne glass of him to him as he drinks it. So again, just a nice little touch that didn't have to be in there, but you could see that Spielberg was just kind of starting to have a little fun. It was like, hey, here's what I can do, guys. You know,
Look at these cinematic choices I can make. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it
Now,
really is beautiful.
She's clearly getting drunk. He clearly can handle his champagne. We actually saw in the very first scene when he was with Jim that he would like say a sentence and then toss back an entire glass while Jim would take a sip. And then he poured himself another glass and say, here's to our divorce, toss back another entire glass. So he clearly, it's no joke that he can tolerate a lot of alcohol. So he's drinking, she's getting clearly intoxicated, and he is just fine.
Right.
But even drunk, and this is great, this is why it's a great scene, because it's very tense. She knows that she really shouldn't trust him. She's blackmailing him for murder.
That's right.
But he's acting, like you said, as though, yeah, this is just a date, whatever, you know, oh, sure,
He's acting as like they know each other because of this little pesky blackmail thing, but once they get this out of the way, they're going to have this beautiful future together. She talks about her deceased husband a lot during their date.
Yeah.
I kind of get the feeling that she's lonely.
Yes.
She's a little sad.
Clearly.
And she has this just incredibly attractive, world-renowned author in her home, which under normal circumstances would never happen.
Right.
So I think she's, as much as she's enjoying it, like you said, it's very tension-driven, the scene, and she's not an idiot. Maybe it's questionable to bake him dinner, but to have a date with him. But she, you know, he invites her on a romantic evening to row out to the lake, have a little late night swim, hot cha-cha, maybe a little skinny dipping. He doesn't say that. I'm completely filling that in.
Right, but that's clearly
But that's the idea.
Yeah.
And she kind of assertively declines.
Yeah, I mean, basically, even though she's drunk, she knows that she can't trust him to take her out to the middle of a lake in pitch black.
Right.
Because she's blackmailing him for murder.
Yes.
And just a brief, funny little sidebar. When she talks about her husband, she first describes him as a chef.
Yes.
And then she talks about how he's a member of the Merchant Marines.
Yeah.
Well, Peter Falk was a cook in the Merchant Marines.
Oh,
so
that's so great.
that was intentionally put in as a nod to
cool.
him. Yeah, that was one of his earlier jobs. Yeah. That was in his autobiography.
He probably really does know how to make an
I'm sure
omelet.
he probably really does know how to make an omelet. I think he knows enough how to make an omelet to intentionally let a shell fall in.
Oh yeah,
so
to make it look bad. He made a very bad omelet.
Yeah. So she knows enough not to trust him to go out on the lake, but she does trust him enough to turn her back on him. And so when she goes to look at the money and she's kind of distracted by it, and she's talking about her husband and this potential future, her late husband and this potential future they could have. And again, I guess this is nice foreshadowing. This is written by Stephen Baccio and directed by Steven Spielberg. So just to take an immediate jump all the way back again to the beginning, when Ken visits his friend Jim, he holds up a bottle of champagne to kind of seal the deal and to apologize for the fuss he made. And he holds the bottle of champagne like a club when he points it at Jim and says, hey, let's celebrate it with some champagne. And then he immediately flips it and opens it. Well, now here he is walking up behind her, holding the champagne like a club, waits for her to turn around to look at him and bonks her with the bottle, and like she kind of silently screams,
Yeah, he doesn't hit her on the back of the head, which he could have.
Sure, because
he can overpower her very easily, and there's really no reason, but he waits for her to turn around because that's the kind of guy he is. Yes. And he clocks her in the face or on the head. I mean, we don't actually see that part, but it's implied.
No.
That he hits her. Yeah.
It's clearly implied. We know that he's hitting her, that he hit her with the bottle to either kill her or knock her out.
And then the next scene cracks me up because it's Jack Cassidy rowing a boat, which was hilarious because I don't know if that guy's ever held an oar in his life. And they intersplice it with his stunt double, which, I mean, that guy looked like Gorgeous George. Like, I don't know where they got that stunt double from, but he looks absolutely nothing like Cassidy. So there's one scene where Cassidy, it's almost like, oh, there's water, right? And he can't even handle it an oar. And then the next scene, it's this guy who's just
an Olympic rower.
Yeah, he's throwing out, jumps out, does like a swan dive to capsize the boat. But basically, that entire scene was set up so that he can take Mrs. Lysenko out into the middle of the lake, make it look like she had a little bit too much to drink, tipped over, and drowned.
Right, and hit her head on the boat.
Hit her head on the boat and drowned, right.
Which is why it didn't matter if he got her at the back of the head. He could have hit her when she wasn't looking because it didn't matter if that was going to be the story. So what? Right. For that matter, he didn't have to look at his partner when he shot him. He could have just shot him while he was on the phone. In fact, he really took a chance because if his partner said, "Ken, what the heck are you doing with that gun?"
You're right. Yeah, he likes to look people in the eyes as he's killing them. That's the kind of guy he is. I don't know if that's on his book jacket, but that's the kind of guy he is.
So now as we're winding down here, of course, he's wearing that delightful yellow coat.
Oh my God. I can't. Do you know what? The costume department, I feel like, was run by someone that must have had a crush on him when she was like a little girl and then dressed him up like a paper doll for this entire episode, because it's like, get your like best brown turtleneck with a corduroy blazer to make him look like, let's dress him up like a paper doll version of what a sophisticated author would look like. Yes. And then now he's in this scene where he's at the water in his country air, I guess, right? Like the country cabin, and he's dressed like what a trademark for like a seafood company would look like. He's wearing like he's little
Gordon Fisherman.
Yeah. He's wearing like this little cropped yellow jacket with a little captain's hat.
Yep.
The tightest jeans that are bell bottoms. It's just, it was a lot. It was really fun. He really looked very costumey. I don't know. Again, other people in this just milling about in the series don't. So I do think it's stylistic for him.
Yes. I think it's supposed to show, again, that he would clearly spend a lot more money than he had to on clothes. Mm-hmm. That they also wanted him to stand out in the crowd so that we could instantly see that it was him and not somebody else who was just milling around when they were pulling her body out of the lake. And I mean, as somebody who has worn his share of turtlenecks and blazers, I have to say, again, age difference. But yes, it was. I still kind of like that look. But that is very true. They did every chance to toss on an ascot or a hat. They were just going for it.
They did. They really went for it.
So, of course, he's not going to go 10 seconds without seeing Colombo. So
Yes.
Colombo, who let himself into his house,
He sure did.
saying, I knew you wouldn't mind because the door was open.
Right.
You know, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know you could just walk into people's houses when the door was open.
Oh, because it's not a thing. Right.
Right.
That's why you didn't know that.
That's right. Exactly.
You can't do that.
Right. So Colombo lets him know that Lily was found. I don't think he mentions her by name. He tries to draw it out from Ken.
Right.
And Ken actually was really pretty good about not saying anything. This is one time where...
Yeah, he didn't confirm that it was the owner of the country store. He didn't confirm that he knew who it was. He just knew that something sad happened.
Yes.
Somebody died at the lake that morning. That's really all he kind of confirmed.
And this is a case where Colombo kind of got caught a little bit because he was pretending he knew nothing. And then he said, yeah, but, I heard it was the shopkeeper down the street,
Right.
Again, trying to get Ken to say something. Or to admit that he knew her.
Yes.
And that's the only thing he firmly did was kind of deny he knew her, but then admitted that he would buy supplies from her, and that's all he really knew her as.
And that's, I think, valid. I think, because Ken Franklin then goes into saying, I know a lot of people without really knowing them. I know, it's basically like saying, I know my accountant, I know my landscaper, I know, you know a bunch of people without actually really knowing them.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I certainly thought it was fair. I thought that was a little bit reaching, except then, later on when Colombo learns more, and that's. Yes. And I believe that's next, where Colombo basically drives over a curb to get to the general store, where all the other police are outside, very Spielbergian. You have the cops outside saying, "I'll tell you once again, George, blah 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 blah." And so they're having that whole conversation. Colombo walks in, helps himself to a candy out of a jar.
He takes one jelly bean, which cracks me up. He reaches into a jar and carefully selects one jelly bean to eat. That's what he did.
That's what he does. And so if you notice in this episode, Spielberg had a lot of little business where if people aren't speaking, they're popping something into their mouth. So that just seemed to be his go-to for what people should do with their hands. The truck driver who's waiting outside the office is eating something. There's just a lot of scenes where people... That. Yeah, I may be making more of it than it is, but there were at least 3 or 4 different people who, the moment they're not speaking, they're popping something in their mouth and eating. And so Colombo did it as he was listening to them talk. While he was browsing around, and he saw the prescription murder book. Yeah. Saw that it was autographed. Again, all it really said was, I think, "All my love, Lily." It was kind of a...
I think that's a generic autograph. I do think it's a generic autograph.
I was going to say generic, maybe a little bit more than generic. All my love is a little bit, but it almost is like it would have been appropriate for someone you knew but didn't really know. Like I thought it would be appropriate for somebody who ran a general store that you're in all the time, So it didn't sound like, it wasn't like, "Hey, thanks for last night." It wasn't anything like that.
I can't wait to marry you. It wasn't anything like that. Yeah.
"Hey, thanks for not telling on me for killing my partner so we can get married."
Oh my God. Yeah. Don't duck, by the way.
Don't turn around. So he learns, he sees that book. He then wanders into the back of the place, which is where she lives. He sees the champagne cork on the floor.
Yes.
He's really kind of putting all this together because, of course, he had commented on the champagne that he was brought with.
Right. He knew that Ken was taking 2 bottles of champagne to his cabin, and now he's finding a champagne cork in her apartment. So,
just by itself.
By itself. So again, like a lot of how Colombo puts cases together, it's a lot of little things.
Yes.
It's not that champagne cork alone isn't going to sink anybody, but it's a lot of little things. Yeah. So after Colombo finds that champagne cork, he kind of leaves that scene, and he goes back to Joanna Ferris's house, her apartment.
That's right.
And to just kind of, he now is acting like a real police officer. A real police. He's acting like himself, who he really is as a police officer, right?
Without
so he's not
on a front.
No act, no front, no bumbling an omelet. And he's just saying to her, "Look, I need you to understand, Ken killed Jim. I need you to understand this. Ken killed Jim, and I think he killed the shopkeeper. And I need you to help me tie this together because there must be something I'm missing." So
because I think he even tells her as a way to try and convince her that he knows that Ken took $15,000 out and then the very next day put it back in the bank.
Put it back in. And Joanna, to her credit, is defending her friend. It's so heartbreaking, but she's defending her friend, saying, Ken would never do this. And that's when Colombo gets a little tough with her and starts laying out fact after fact after fact. And he
Right.
says, listen, just sit down, tell me everything you know, everything you can think about of their relationship. Basically treat it like, they call it, like analysis, like therapy.
Right.
And to
Yes.
treat it like a therapy session. And she says, okay. And the scene fades out with Colombo sitting in a chair, listening to Joanna talk about how they met, what their
Right.
working process was like. And the scene kind of fades away. So it looks like they were going to pull an all-nighter.
Yeah, they're going to talk a long time because, again, and this is true of Poirot and Sherlock Holmes and all these great detectives, you never know what's going to be important.
Right.
So tell me
Right.
everything, because you don't know what's going to be the important thing that you
Mhm.
might just dismiss. And what he learned that was important is that Jim would always write his ideas down on whatever scrap of paper happened to be handy. So
Right.
if he had an idea for a mystery, he'd write it on a matchbook. And so that's what we find. And yes, you're right. You get the idea that this is going to be a very long process. And then I guess we're back at the office at this point.
Right. So the next scene is that, not letting a body get cold.
Right.
Ken Franklin's moving out of that office.
Right.
And he's got moving men there, and he approaches the exterior of his office building where he shared
Right.
with Jim for 10 years.
Right.
And sees that there's a moving truck, and he's like, okay, what's, again, just because he's so pleasant, he very aggressively demands to know the status of how the office move is going. And the truck driver just said, oh, nothing's happened. I don't know what's going on, but two guys went up there, and I've been waiting here for a while. Nothing's happened yet.
To be fair, in this one tiny instance, he just said, hey, how's it going? You're almost done. And the guy said, I haven't even started. And that's when he gets angry. Then it's like, what do you mean you haven't started? What do you?
Yeah.
And that's just it. So then he goes up the elevator, gets out, and you see two policemen uniformed. And then as he walks past them and he's kind of wondering what's going on, a third one, Spielbergingly, shows up out of the blue and just kind of stares at him too.
Right.
And then he walks into the office, and there's good old Colombo sitting at the desk.
Yeah.
And in one of your favorite lines, I'll let you say it because it's one of your favorites.
I think Ken says, what are you doing here? He's like, oh, I happen to be in the neighborhood. And Ken shouts at him, you're always in the neighborhood. It's just, he's finally had it. This is the moment where he can no longer keep his composure. His facade is down, and he is like, you're always in the neighborhood.
Yes, it's like, it's enough. It's enough already. I expected to get away with this crime. What are you still doing here?
All right, now what are you doing here? I happen to be in the neighborhood.
Oh, you're always in the neighborhood.
So this is where they have their sit down and talk moment, where Colombo really at that point flat out says, I'm here to arrest you for the murder of Jim Ferris. And Ken says, yeah, all right, but give me a dime so I can call my lawyer and have you sue you for false arrest and defamation of character. Colombo just says, basically, why don't you just simply make a statement? Basically, why don't you confess? I've got you. Yeah. Why don't you just confess? Make it easy on everybody. And so they kind of switch places. Colombo had gotten up out of the throne in the writer's room, and Ken sat in it, and Colombo got up to the other side. And he was, again, kind of playing to his ego just a hair, saying, for a while I thought I was never going to get you. You kept me running in circles. Mm-hmm. This was an episode where he didn't pull punches when it was time to not pull punches. Right. He basically said, I know that Jim was at your cabin, not from the witness, because you killed the witness.
He did say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he killed the witness.
But I can prove that he was at the cabin. And how he could prove it is in a way that realistically he actually couldn't prove it at all. But it was just that that the idea was, and this was him really insulting his ego and his vanity, saying basically that first murder with Jim was brilliant.
Yes.
The idea of taking him someplace else and calling from there and killing him and just throwing everything off was brilliant. The second murder, the death of the shopkeeper, Lily, that was sloppy. Yeah. So basically, Jim, the clever one, because you're a dope, is what he's saying.
Yes.
That one was clever and brilliant and couldn't have come from you, who doesn't know anything about writing. I mean, he's really just at this point just completely just backing up a dump truck on him.
Mrs. Melville, she'd have been very disappointed.
Well, come on, get to the climax, Lieutenant. You're talking to a writer.
Am I? That's not what I heard.
Yeah.
But the second one, that was you. That was
all you. Yep. That was all you. And so Colombo goes through sort of a little laundry list of all the circumstantial evidence he gathered.
Yes.
But then saves the biggest one for last, which is that Jim had scribbled down the exact murder plot of how he was killed.
Yes.
So Jim scribbled down A wants to kill B. B sets up an alibi, has him call from the office, takes him to a remote location, is killed. So that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
Right. And Jim did write it down because he had a habit of writing everything down.
That's right. And so at that point, he does not break down, but he confesses. He basically
does not
says,
break down. You're right. But he does confess.
There's
no emotion there.
There's no emotion at all. And that was one of the things that Colombo runs through, is of how emotionless he was, showing no remorse for a partner he's been with for 10 years. But yeah, he does not break down, but he just says, well, you have to admit, I had you going for a while, didn't I? And then that's pretty much the episode. He's led off with another cop came in to lead him away. He's under arrest. He basically confessed to murder. And that the one last little tease is that he said, the ironic thing is that actually was my idea.
Yes.
It's one of the only good ones I had, and Jim wrote it down. Who would have thought that idiot would have written it down? Basically.
Yeah. He killed him and he still calls him an idiot. I mean, oh my goodness. But yeah, he does say that was my only good idea, and that idiot wrote it down.
Yeah. Yeah. In the meantime, that idiot was responsible for making him millions for doing nothing but showing up and talking to cute girls. That's
right. That's what he did. He did it well, though, but he did do that.
I would say, if there's nothing else, I think we can move on to our segment, which is, when did Colombo know? Now, this was asked and answered a little bit. Actually, I guess it wasn't. I guess it wasn't asked.
It wasn't asked. It was answered. It was Colombo told us, but correct.
Colombo basically just said, "I knew it almost right from the start."
Mm-hmm.
I kind of knew it right from the start. There was nothing definite. There's a lot of little things. Little things.
So I'm gonna take him at his word and say he knew pretty early. I think he was fairly sure when Joanna said that Ken didn't do any of the writing.
So even before he met Ken, you think he knew? So. Okay. That's an argument to be made, because you're right, because he knew that before he even met Ken. I think he was suspicious the moment he met Ken. I was going to say, when did Colombo know, was that plane ride, which is the minute he met Ken. So instead of taking a plane ride, he drove, and he found that curious.
Yes.
So, but I think you're right. I think an argument could be made that before he even met him, if he didn't know, he was a very strong suspect.
I would say it would be fair to say he strongly suspected before he met him.
Right.
And once he met him, it was kind of confirmed. So whether you want to say no versus suspected, I think there's a decent argument either way on that.
Colombo himself lists the following. He listed, all those little things where first it was deciding to drive up instead of taking the plane. Right. It was the mail that, you walked in with a stack of mail, or there was a stack of opened mail. The night that you reported your dead partner. And then he does explicitly state that he showed zero emotion, zero remorse, not remorse, but zero emotion about a man that you worked with for over 10 years.
Right. Yeah. And the insurance policy. When he took out $15,000 and put it back in the bank the very next day. So he listed a long list of circumstantial stuff. Right. And then that last little one, we find out that he said, I had that idea. Was it 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
It was a long time ago.
Jim.
Ken told Jim a long time ago, years before he was murdered. If you recall, when they were driving up, it was kind of sad. When they were driving up to the cabin in the very beginning, Jim says to Ken, I can't help but feel this feeling of deja vu that's overcoming me. And it's because he wrote down the very murder plot that he was about to be the victim of.
Exactly. So again, great foreshadowing. But it also means that Colombo had to search probably about a decade's worth of paper in that office to find that little idea that was jotted down. Right. And knowing Colombo, he did. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I think we both can agree really right away. Just a matter of precisely when.
I'm going to go with when he found out he did not fly. He took the car.
Okay.
That's my official answer. Okay.
All right. Fair enough. So now is the part where we rate the killer on a sympathy meter.
Yes.
From a scale of Ruth Gordon, the most sympathetic killer in Colombo, to Dick Van Dyke, the most vicious Colombo murderer.
I'm beginning to be very fond of you, Lieutenant. I think you're a very kind man.
Don't count on that.
On this scale, I got to put him pretty close to Dick Van Dyke here. I would put him in between 3/4 and full Dick Van Dyke. Because, first of all, he's a horrible person.
Correct.
He was a fraud for many years.
Yes.
He waited until both victims looked at him before killing them. He didn't have to in the case.
Yes.
He made sure that the last thing Jim did on Earth was lie to his wife, and that bothers me a lot.
Horrible.
He saluted his partner's dead body. Basically, this guy made him a multimillionaire, and he did that. He drove to the widow's house with her husband's dead body in the trunk of his car and consoled her.
And had her make him a drink.
Yeah, and all for the purpose of his ego was a big one. And not only that, he could have gotten out of that. He could have said, he could have just said, without even killing him, if his partner just went on to do other books, he could have said, you know what? He was kind of the ID man. I wrote stuff. It's just not the same without him. I really don't want to write these books anymore.
He did get out of it because when he had the interview with the journalist, he did say, she said, are there going to be any more Mrs. Melville books now that Jim has been killed? And he said, no, we're going to put that to rest. So he really, like you said, he could have done all of that. He could have just said that sentence, right?
Well, he could exactly. He could have
without
just said,
having to kill him.
Yeah, without having to kill him at all. He could have just said, hey, you know what? This was a team effort, these books, and without my right hand man, because he's Mr. Publicity, he's the face guy, so he could have come up with a million ways to have done that without having to actually kill him. I think it was the money that probably was the final straw. But for all those reasons, I would put him really just shy of Dick Van Dyke on this one.
Yeah, I would agree. I put him at like 90%
Yep.
Dick Van Dyke, only because no one's as vicious as Dick Van Dyke's character, right? So he can't be. But he's real close. For all the reasons that you said, there was another one. I don't know if it was a slip up in the script. I think it was intentional when Colombo meets Ken at his home where all the police are there and they discovered Jim's body. Ken is referring to Jim as he, and then he stops and corrects himself and calls him it. So I think he's just unbelievably callous. There's a scene where they're pulling poor Mrs. Lysenko out of that lake. Everyone looks very worried. Everyone looks upset. And he is yawning and walking away.
Yeah, he literally yawns.
I think he's a real sociopath.
Yes.
I think given the opportunity to propel himself forward, I think he would kill again without hesitation. Yeah. And I don't know if he necessarily enjoyed killing Mrs. Lysenko, but he sure as heck didn't mind it. And he certainly enjoyed killing his partner. For sure.
He enjoyed killing
He
his
enjoyed
partner.
that.
That was very personal.
Yes.
That was very personal.
So if you have a sort of sliding scale, he's about as far to Dick Van Dyke as you can be without actually being Dick Van Dyke, who is just the actual worst. He is the actual worst, his character.
He really is.
Yeah.
Now we have to discuss, will it hold up in court?
Tell me, Doctor, how do you catch a man like that?
You don't?
You're probably right.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little trickier because it's a ton of circumstantial evidence.
Yeah.
But it is circumstantial evidence. Even just the fact that the plot happened the way it was written down by his partner, I don't know if that would really be enough to convict somebody on that. I don't know. I guess because people are convicted for circumstantial evidence, that it probably would be enough to do it. I guess if the assumption is he withdrew his confession, it would be a lot harder. If the confession stands and all the other circumstantial evidence stands, I think he probably does hold up in court. But that's a big if, and I guess we don't know that.
Yeah, I think this has more than other Columbo episodes. I think it has a lot of circumstantial evidence. I think writing down the plot is pretty good, but I think maybe less of a chance of a conviction on killing his partner, but a pretty hefty conviction on or solid conviction on killing Mrs. Lysenko. He
Right.
did withdraw $15,000. He did put it back the next day after she was discovered,
Dead.
missing. I think,
Yeah.
again, dead, I'm sorry. So I think maybe all of those things combined, I think this is a lot of circumstantial evidence. You
Right.
can't really include him opening mail. You can't really include him
Right.
driving, but you can certainly include, maybe a champagne cork in her apartment when she clearly
Right.
doesn't have a champagne lifestyle. I think you can include the money. I think you can include his exact murder plot being written down
Right.
by his victim.
You could include the insurance policy.
The insurance policy alone.
That's a big one.
The insurance policy alone is really all the motive you really need.
Right.
Although I do think he killed more for ego than an insurance
Yeah.
policy, but that's just my opinion. But I think there's a lot here that I think it would stick. I think this one
Yeah.
would stick.
Yeah, I would agree. I would almost think if he threatened to take his confession back, he could almost pull an old-fashioned murder where he says, look, you can take the confession back, but then we'll tell everyone that the reason you killed him was because you didn't write these books.
Yeah,
But
right.
if you let the confession stand, we'll let everyone think that it was because you wanted the insurance money.
Right.
But if you take your confession back, we're going to tell the world you're a fraud, and that ego stuff might be enough for him to say, okay, that's it. I give.
Yeah.
You got me good enough. I don't want this to go through the courts.
Yeah.
All right. So all there is to do now is to say thank you for listening to Rumpled Trenchcoat, and we will.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to talk about something. This entire episode was all about this writing team, and their relationship kind of went south. It wasn't great.
A bit.
So what I thought I'd do is I would talk about a writing team who had a beautiful relationship, and that is the creators of the show, Levinson and Link. I got actually most of this information from Wikipedia and New York Times, but I wanted to talk about Richard Levinson and William Link. They collaborated as writing partners and were friends for over 43 years.
Wow.
So really just a lifetime friendship and partnership. And it's really cute. They met on the very first day of middle school. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they met on the
That's
first
great.
day of middle school. They grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, and they kind of bonded because they both loved. Now, tell me how much this makes sense. Ready? They both loved puzzles.
Okay.
They loved magic.
Right.
Okay, and they were huge fans of Ellery Queen.
Okay. I mean, that certainly explains everything.
Exactly. So these two were fast friends, and throughout high school, they wrote radio scripts. They even went to college together. They went to the University of Pennsylvania, and they were film critics for local college newspapers. So they always had this friendship. They were always really working as writing partners. The projects that we're familiar with are, of course, obviously Colombo, right?
Mhm.
But also Mannix, Ellery Queen. So how amazing. They were able to develop a TV show
Yeah.
based upon the character of Ellery Queen after being fans of Ellery Queen. Murder, She Wrote, obviously, which is I'm a huge fan of Murder, She Wrote as well.
Yes.
And they did a couple of movies, they did a couple of TV movies, but they even wrote a Broadway show called Merlin.
Oh, I
Okay,
didn't know
and
that. Okay.
Yeah, and it starred this magician, Doug Henning, which I knew the name was familiar to me.
Uh-huh.
But do you know who he is?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you know who he is. Okay.
Yeah.
He sort of looks like Gallagher. He's like that
Yeah.
1970s magician that looks like
the big afro.
Yes.
Yeah.
The mustache. He's always like levitating and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
okay.
great. I
Yeah.
had no idea. That's awesome.
So they're just like huge magic fans, and they even got to do that Broadway play. And they kind of prided themselves on creating like intelligent program rather than violent programs.
Uh-huh.
And it was said that the two men always worked together in the same room
Oh, wow.
with Levinson at the typewriter and Link sort of pacing behind him.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and sadly, the only reason their partnership came to an end was that Richard Levinson unexpectedly died of a heart attack at age 52.
Mm.
Very suddenly, very sad. And as a tribute to his sort of lifelong writing partner and childhood friend, William Link wrote this TV film called The Boys in 1991. And it starred James Woods and John Lithgow, so pretty heavy hitters.
Yeah. At the time, absolutely.
Yeah, and Link has said that he really wrote it as sort of therapy to help him get past Levinson's death.
Oh, sure. If they knew each other from middle school, good grief.
Yeah. And if you read the description of the movie, you can't get it on, it was never released on VHS or DVD in America or anything. But if you read the description of the movie, it says the characters are almost married and have shared a lifetime of experience and
Aw.
experiences. Yeah, it's just so beautiful.
I'll have to try and get a hold of that and watch that.
Yeah, I would like to. We should do that together. I would like to
Yeah.
watch that with you. I just want to say one more thing that Link had said that we weren't collaborators, we were brothers. So
Aw.
very, very, very different than the writing team of
Yes.
Franklin and Ferris.
Yes, I would say a little bit of a difference there. It sounds like they both actually wrote for the materials that they were doing, for one. Oh, that's great. I liked it a lot.
I love it. I love hearing that, behind the scenes, these two really were true collaborators and friends.
Yeah.
It's just like a beautiful 4-decade relationship between these two guys. I love it.
Yeah, that's terrific. And they created something that many things, but certainly Colombo
Yes.
as just a wonderful, wonderful multi-generational, the wonderful thing to experience.
Yeah, and it still resonates with people today, which is why we're here doing this podcast.
Yes, we're doing a podcast on a show that they created back in a time when it was decades before podcasts even existed.
Yeah.
Much less personal computers. Their idea of high technology on many episodes of Colombo were computers the size of a room, and here we are, talking to each other, on a couple of laptops,
Right.
talking about an amazing show, and who knows, there may actually be people listening to this on their devices.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful because no matter what, it just meant a lot to us and to millions of people. So
And I'm sure to each other,
Yes.
it was just so this is all just a big love fest, and this is
Yeah.
a beautiful way to sort of end our episode,
Yes.
our podcast episode, and can, I guess, meet up again next time to talk about the next Columbo episode
one
that we
more
were.
thing. One more.
Oh, yes.
Since we mentioned Ellery Queen, I think it's interesting to note that Ellery Queen was actually a pseudonym. Not only was it the name of the character, but it was also the pseudonym of the two authors who wrote it. This is Ellery Queen
Oh,
himself was a product of two authors, Frederick Dene and Manfred Bennington Lee.
those are phenomenal names. That's
Yeah.
their real name. Those are their real names?
No, believe it or not, their real names were even more interesting.
Okay, let me hear it.
Their real names were Frederick Dane's real name was Daniel Nathan.
Okay.
So he took the Daniel and made Danae out of it. It's spelled
Okay.
Dannay, but I'm sure that was just kind of a variation on Danny
Sure.
as a last name. And Manfred Bennington Lee's name was Emmanuel Benjamin Lepofsky.
Honestly, either or are just the best.
I was going to say that's, I think they could have done very well with either.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I love a good pseudonym.
Yes. So the author that Levinson and Link loved and bonded over was in fact two authors that collaborated to make this wonderful character Ellery Queen. Those two authors, Dene and Lee, worked together for decades themselves until one of them, of course, passed away maybe about 10 years before the other one. And unlike this episode, when he passed away, the stories did continue, and they were what you would expect, which is they were very good, but not quite the same. And so you would expect that. You would expect that in a team where both really contributed, that one would still be perfectly able to write very good stories, but there would be a slight change to them, as you would imagine.
Right.
So what's neat is you had mentioned that they did, Levinson and Link did get to do a TV series, Ellery Queen, and they did that before Columbo. But I also was a big fan of Ellery Queen, and his character in the books was actually often mean and kind of priggish, just really not a people person, not just very abrupt, almost cruel, but not, I guess cruel is going too far, very cold.
Like short-tempered or ill-tempered?
I'm thinking more like Sherlock Holmes, where it's like he just really was like a fact machine. He would spit out facts. He really wouldn't think of people's feelings. So I guess cruel was definitely incorrect in that he wouldn't go out of his way to hurt somebody, go out of his way to break news gently, for example. But of course, for the TV show, which is something that we should probably do anyway because there are only a few episodes, the character Ellery Queen was changed into a really very delightful, clumsy, disheveled, forgetting to eat, walking around. Basically, it was Colombo. They just basically made Ellery Queen Colombo before Colombo existed.
That is phenomenal. That is so fantastic.
And it made for a wonderful show. So that was my one more thing. So I would imagine at this point, all there is to say thank you for listening to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Colombo podcast. I'm Rich Nocella, and here with my sister,
Adrian Nocella.
and until next week, when we talk about Death Lends a Hand, I probably should have thought of a sign-off line. So we will think of one for next time.
Let's think of one. Maybe it can include like pseudonyms for us. Maybe we should get pseudonyms too. I'd like to be known from now on as Aurora Zazenfras.
Oh, Aurora what? I'm sorry?
Zazenfras? Of the Zazenfrasses from Boston. Yes, that's my new...
Okay, the Boston Zazenfrasses.
Yes, it's an old family.
Fair enough. I think I'll go by Tralfaz Balloon Ball.
Okay, perfect. We got it.
Okay, we are absolutely set. And goodbye, folks. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.